Just as a question, and then I'll address that. Mary wasn't his mother. Even though the New Testament says that Mary was the mother of Jesus, somehow he wasn't. Why would that be relevant? Because Mary is not, although Christians claim Luke's genealogy is that of Mary, the text doesn't indicate that at all. In fact, Luke 1:27, it's very clear that it's Joseph's in the house of David. In fact, the whole reason why they had to go from Nazareth to Bethlehem is because Joseph was from the house of David, not Mary, for the census. But he's saying, but Mary wasn't even Jesus' mother. Right.
I thought about the virgin,
So let me explain to you where that would come from. If he said that Mary wasn't Jesus' mother, so that would be obviously most Christians will say we don't believe that, and that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Every Christian will say that, but that is very Joannian. That's John type thinking. It's John type thinking, because Jesus becomes the Son of God at different stages in the Gospels. The earlier the Gospel is written, the later in life Jesus becomes the Son of God. I'm going to say it again. The earlier the book is written, the later in Jesus' career does Jesus become the Son of God. So if we just do the Gospels, Jesus becomes the Son of God. In Mark, he becomes at his baptism. He's a full-blown adult. If we look at Matthew and Luke, when does Jesus become the Son of God? At his conception. In fact, we're very much told that the angel speaking to Mary in the Annunciation says, she's not even pregnant, but you're going to pray and you'll call his name Jesus, because he will be the Son of God. So the Son of God in Matthew, Matthew doesn't use this language specifically, but I would presume Matthew wouldn't disagree with that. Matthew and Luke place Jesus, the Son of God, at his birth or conception. Okay, so that would be, now when we get to John, John does not like Mary, because Mary does not fit well with what John is going to present. In fact, you're going, really? He doesn't like Mary? Well, there's only one gospel that never even mentions Mary by name once, and that's the book of John. You will not find Mary's name there. Mary, the mother of Jesus. Mary Magdalene, sure. You will never find Mary, the mother of Jesus, by name in the book of John. He doesn't want her there. She's a nuisance. And in fact, when we encounter the first time in the book of John, does anyone know where? At the wedding in Cana. And what's going on in the wedding in Cana? This is, for many people, Jesus' favorite miracle. He turns water into wine. And I wonder how the Assemblies of God would deal with that. Because I would think that in the Assemblies of God kind of Jesus would be turning wine into water. But I don't know, how did that go? But if you notice, it will say the mother of Jesus will say that, but never call her Mary. It's a way of being as disrespectful as possible. So she's never even named. And then when she's introduced in the first conversation, Jesus says what? Woman, what are the next words?
What have I to do with you?
What do I have to do with you? What do I have to do with you? Well, I'm your mom. I was in labor for 36 hours. Had an episiotomy, nearly ripped me in half. What do you mean what I have to do with you? Okay, so, woman, what do I have to do with you? Would that phrase ever fit into the book of Luke? No. And Luke, if Mary is the instrument by which Jesus becomes the Son of God, she is held in the most exalted state. In Luke, we find the most exalted teaching about Mary. Luke, because she did it. She was the vessel by which Jesus becomes the Son of God. From John, when does Jesus become the Son of God? At his conception? Oh, no. What is the prologue of John? The first 18 verses, right? So Jesus is the Word, and the Word becomes flesh, and he's a God, and he's with God. He has become the Son of God somewhere in the eternal past, at some stage somewhere else. You can read the prologue. It's what's called higher Christology, which means that this is the highest Christology. This is the most exalted description of Jesus anywhere you'll find in the Christian Bible. We don't know who it is until verse 17. We kind of course, have an idea who it's going to be about, but in verse 17 it becomes clear this is talking about Jesus. Therefore, Mary is an impediment on this. Birth. He's the Son of God somewhere else. So Mary now, her position is diminished. John has always been regarded by Christians as the most cherished and spiritual gospel. Always has been. So if there's ever been a difference, people will go with John. It's always been the church's favorite. So therefore, John portraying Mary as someone who really has nothing to do with Jesus. So that is not technically, she's called the mother of Jesus, but they don't really have a relationship. She was, whatever, what is she even doing there? She's just a problem. She's a bother. In fact, in John 7, it's something very strange in John chapter 7, where people are complaining about the claim that Jesus is the Messiah because doesn't the Messiah have to be born in Bethlehem? And this fellow comes from Nazareth. You notice that the author of John, whoever he is, does nothing to respond to that. It's just left because it's not important. That means it's just left. It's just dropped. So we have the argument. It's the only time you have in the Christian Bible an argument of opposers of Jesus saying something where there is nothing in there to respond to it. It's left empty because the saying is, it isn't important. It isn't important that he was born in Bethlehem. It doesn't important who he was born to. She has really nothing to do with him because John has already written about 95 and so on. So that's where that sentiment comes from. It's Joannian in theme. It's not to be taken in a hyper-literal way, but rather it's a theme that quite a number of Christians have spoken about. But it's very clear, Mary in the book of John is to be diminished because she's not relevant. She's just not relevant. And she goes unnamed in the book of John.